I arrived in this country with a suitcase that smelled of mothballs and a vocabulary of exactly 50 words. For 32 years, I scrubbed floors until my knees calloused. I worked double shifts at a diner where the grease settled permanently into my pores, and I saved. I saved copper pennies in jars, then dollar bills in envelopes, then checks in a bank account that grew painfully slowly. The house on Elm Street wasn't just wood and vinyl siding. It was the physical manifestation of my survival. It was my trophy. So, 5 years ago, when my son Michael married Jessica, handing them the keys felt like passing a baton. I put the down payment, my life savings, on that beautiful 3-bedroom sanctuary. The deed remained in my name. A safety net I told them was just for now. Until they built their credit. "We're family," I had said, pressing the cold metal into Michael's palm. "Don't worry about the rest." For the first year, the illusion held. Sunday dinners were filled with laughter that bounced off the freshly painted walls. Jessica would hug me, smelling of vanilla and ambition, calling me Mom. But looking back, I see the cracks I chose to ignore. The way her eyes assessed the furniture I'd bought, calculating its worth, the way she'd stiffen when I offered advice. The slow, surgical excision of my presence from their lives began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet cancellations. Sunday calls became bi-weekly texts. Visits were met with vague excuses about headaches, busy schedules, or the house being a mess. I tried to be the modern, understanding mother. Young couples need space, I told myself. But space turned into a chasm. The breaking point should have been Thanksgiving. I had arrived at their door with my pumpkin pie, Michael's favorite since he was a toothless toddler. Jessica opened the door, and the air in the hallway dropped 10 degrees. Her smile was a tight, mechanical grimace, the kind you give a door-to-door salesman you're trying to dismiss. "Oh, you're here," she said, though I had confirmed 3 times. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. She didn't shout, she pricked. Michael's mother never taught him to pick up after himself. She joked to the air, clinking her wine glass. "I guess table manners were optional in your generation, Helen." She laughed, looking for an ally in my son. And Michael, my boy, who once punched a bully for calling me a name, sat there, pushing peas around his plate. His spine curved into a question mark. He said nothing. His silence was louder than her insults. I started noticing the surveillance. When I called Michael, Jessica answered. "He's in the shower. He's sleeping. He's busy." I was being filtered, screened, erased. 3 months ago, I dropped by unannounced with a box of childhood photos. Through the bay window, I saw them. They were laughing, bathed in the golden afternoon light, Jessica's hand resting possessively on his forearm. They looked happy, relaxed. The moment Jessica spotted my old sedan, the scene shattered. She whispered something to him, sharp and fast. Michael's face darkened like a shutter coming down. When they opened the door, I wasn't greeted by my son. I was greeted by a security guard and his handler. "We have boundaries?" Jessica snapped, not inviting me past the threshold. "You can't just show up." The word boundaries stung like a slap. Since when did a mother need a visa to visit the child she raised? But denial is a powerful anesthetic. I kept telling myself it was stress, or a phase, or my fault. Then came December 23rd. I was sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by rolls of silver paper and ribbons, wrapping presents for Michael. I had bought them anyway, pathetic in my hope that the silence would break before Christmas morning. My phone buzzed against the hardwood, a text from Michael. My heart actually leaped a physical jump in my chest. Maybe he's apologizing. Maybe he's inviting me. I opened the message. "Don't come to our house for Christmas. Jessica doesn't want you here. Respect our decision." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred into a watery smear. I read it again. Our house. Their house? The house I found? The house where my name was ink-stamped on the deed? The house bought with the money earned from 32 years of swollen ankles and sleepless nights? And then, the second sentence. "Jessica doesn't want you here. Not we, Jessica." My son hadn't even bothered to pretend it was a joint decision. He had handed the knife to his wife and let her twist it. He was throwing away the woman who gave him life for a woman he'd known for 6 years. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing weight of grief that usually follows heartbreak, but it didn't come. Instead, something inside me, some ancient iron part of my soul that had survived poverty, an abusive first husband, and cancer woke up. It crystallized. The heat of my love turned into the cold clarity of a judge. I smiled. In the silence of my empty living room, I actually smiled. Did they really think they could banish me from my own property? Did they truly see me as nothing more than a helpless, doddering old woman who would weep into her handkerchief and fade away? My fingers, steady and calm, moved across the screen. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. I typed 3 sentences. Simple, direct, nuclear. You said you are evicting us. You said we have 30 days to get out. I hit send. Then I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Exactly 53 minutes later, tires screeched in my driveway. I didn't rush. I smoothed my cardigan, checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes were dry, my jaw set, and waited for the pounding. It came, furious and desperate. "Mom, Mom, open the door." I unlocked it slowly. Michael burst in, his face blotchy and red, eyes wide with a panic I hadn't seen since he was a child who'd lost his favorite toy. He looked wild, breathless, stripping off his coat as he paced my entryway. "Mom, what the hell? You can't just..." "Can't what, Michael?" My voice was terrifyingly pleasant. I walked past him into the kitchen, the scent of Earl Grey rising from my cup. "Can't send a text message to my own son? You said, eviction," he stammered, following me, his movements jerky. "You said we have 30 days. That's insane. You can't kick us out because of one text." I turned and leaned against the counter, sipping my tea. I looked at him, really looked at him. When had he become this stranger? This terrified man-child who prioritized a woman's tantrums over his mother's dignity? "One text message," I repeated softly. "Is that what you think this is about?" "Jessica just," she thought. He faltered, the excuse dying in his throat. I held up a hand. "Do not blame her for words that came from your phone number. You are 34 years old, Michael. You made a choice. We can't afford to move right now." His anger deflated into pathetic desperation. Jessica just quit her job to start her online business. And the rent? God, Mom, rent is astronomical. That's our home. We've lived there for 5 years. "You should have thought about that," I said, my voice dipping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, before telling me I wasn't welcome in my own house for Christmas. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched the realization dawn on him. He had actually forgotten who owned the roof over his head. Jessica had said "our house" so many times that he had started to believe the lie. He looked at me, searching for the pushover mother, the one who forgave everything, the one who would sacrifice her own happiness to keep the peace. She wasn't there anymore. "It was a mistake," he whispered. "I shouldn't have sent it. But eviction, that's extreme." "What is extreme?" I countered, setting my tea down with a sharp clink. "Is being erased from your life. What is extreme is realizing I raised a son who could discard me like yesterday's trash because his wife demanded it. You have 30 days, Michael. The notice is official." After Michael left, the silence in my house didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat at my kitchen table, my hands trembling so violently I had to clasp them together until my knuckles turned white. What had I done? I had just evicted my own child. The boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid by working overtime, whose heart I had tried to protect from the world. Was I a monster? A vindictive old woman lashing out because her feelings were hurt? But then I looked at my phone. That text message was still there. "Jessica doesn't want you here." It wasn't just a rejection, it was a dismissal of my existence. If I didn't draw a line in the sand now, I would be buried by it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I worked. I went to the filing cabinet in my study, the metal drawers groaning as I pulled them open. I found the deed, the mortgage papers, the bank transfer records for the down payment. My name, all my name. Michael and Jessica had contributed nothing, not to the purchase, not to the taxes. I organized the documents into neat piles, my movements precise and mechanical. This was how I survived the early years in America, by turning chaos into lists, by controlling the controllables. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple as I drove to the law office of Patricia Henderson. Patricia had handled my will 2 years ago. She was a woman of sharp angles and even sharper intellect, with eyes that had seen every variety of human greed. "I want to make sure my eviction notice is legally airtight," I told her, sliding the thick folder across her mahogany desk. She read them in silence, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. Finally, she looked up over her spectacles. "This is your son and daughter-in-law? And they've been living there rent-free for 5 years?" "Yes." "Then legally, Helen, you are well within your rights. The 30-day notice is standard. But—" She paused, tapping a manicured nail on the desk. "Are you sure? Family disputes like this, they are like grenades. Once you pull the pin, you can't put it back. It gets ugly." "It's already ugly, Patricia," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just making the ugliness official." She nodded slowly. "I'll file the papers, but you need to protect yourself. Get a formal property appraisal immediately. Document the condition of the house. If they act out, if they damage the property in retaliation, you'll need proof." I hadn't thought of that. Retaliation. 2 days later, I met Bill Morrison, a recommended inspector, at the house. I had texted Michael that I was coming for an inspection, my legal right as the landlord, knowing full well they were both at work. My hand shook as I slid my spare key into the lock. It turned with a smooth click. I stepped inside, and my breath hitched. Oh my God. The hallway was gone. The living room was. Vast. Too vast. Bill walked in behind me, his heavy boots echoing on the hardwood. He stopped dead. "Mrs. Chen, were these renovations permitted?" I didn't know about them," I whispered. "See this span here?" He pointed to where the wall between the kitchen and living room used to be. That was a load-bearing wall. They removed it to create an open-concept layout. "Without a support beam installed, your second floor is currently sagging. This isn't just a code violation. It's a structural hazard." I felt sick. I remembered Jessica gushing a year ago about opening up the space. I thought she meant moving furniture, maybe taking down a non-structural partition. I didn't know she meant gutting the skeleton of my house. Bill led me to the master bathroom. "It gets worse." He pointed to the new, trendy subway tiles. "They redid the plumbing. Look at the grout here, it's crumbling. And tap this." He knocked on the wall. It sounded hollow, wet. "There is significant water damage behind this tile. They didn't seal it properly. You have mold growing in your studs, Mrs. Chen. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in repairs just to make the house safe again." My house, my investment, my security for old age. They hadn't just stolen my relationship with my son. They were actively rotting my legacy from the inside out. I sat in my car afterwards, staring at the front door. I felt a cold rage settling in my stomach, heavier and harder than grief. They had done this without asking, without permission, treating my property like their playground. That evening, my phone rang. The screen flashed, "Jessica." I stared at it for 3 rings, 4. Then I picked up. Helen. Her voice was no longer the sugary falsetto she used in front of guests. It was ice. "We got your little inspection notice. How dare you invade our privacy like that?" "It is my house, Jessica. I have every legal right." "Legal right?" She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You are trying to make us homeless right before Christmas. What kind of mother does that?" "The kind whose son told her she is not welcome in her own property." "That house is ours," she screamed, the mask slipping completely. "We have lived there for 5 years. We put our heart and soul into it. We made it modern. We fixed your outdated, ugly taste. You removed load-bearing walls without a permit." I cut in, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "You caused water damage in the master bath. I have it all documented, Jessica. Bill Morrison is writing the report right now." There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end. The air went out of her tires. Then, her voice dropped. It became low, venomous. "You're going to regret this, Helen. You think you're teaching us a lesson? All you're doing is ensuring you die alone. No son, no grandchildren. Just you and your precious money in a cold, empty house. Is that what you want? The threat hung in the air, vibrating with cruelty. Die alone. It was every elderly parent's nightmare, weaponized. 30 days, Jessica, I said, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. The clock is ticking. I hung up and collapsed onto my sofa. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but amidst the fear, there was clarity. Jessica had just shown me her true face. She wasn't a misunderstood daughter-in-law. She was a usurper. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, I saw an email notification from Patricia Henderson. Subject: filing confirmation. Helen, the eviction papers are ready to be filed with the court tomorrow morning. Once this is done, it becomes a matter of public record. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed? I sat in the dark, the blue light of the laptop illuminating my face. I thought about the Thanksgiving insults. I thought about the text message. I thought about the sagging ceiling and the rot behind the bathroom tiles. I typed, "I am certain. Proceed." I pressed send. There was no turning back now. The war had begun. 3 days later, the official court summons arrived at their door. I know, because Michael called me at 7 a.m., his voice pitched high with a mixture of disbelief and terror. "A court summons, Mom? You actually filed?" "It is the legal process, Michael," I answered, buttering my toast with a hand that refused to shake. "Everything must be documented." "This is insane. You're taking your own son to court." "No, Michael. I am reclaiming my property from tenants who destroyed it. There is a difference." He hung up on me. An hour later, they were at my door. I watched through the sheer curtains as Jessica practically dragged Michael up the walkway. Her face was twisted into a mask of fury, her makeup smudge-free, her outfit sharp and aggressive. She didn't knock. She pounded. I opened the door before she could damage the wood. "We need to talk," Jessica hissed, pushing past me into the foyer without an invitation. "Right now." "You are in my home, Jessica," I said, leaving the door open. "Adjust your tone." She whirled on me, eyes blazing with a fire that felt less like anger and more like panic. "Your home. Your house. That's all you care about, isn't it? Not your son, not his happiness. Just your precious investment. You removed load-bearing walls without permits," I countered, my voice low. "You caused thousands of dollars in water damage. You stripped the equity from my property and called it renovation." "We improved it," she screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "We made it modern. We turned that boring, dated museum into something valuable. And this is how you repay us? You destroyed it without my permission." Michael finally stepped forward, his face pale, looking like a ghost haunting his own life. "Mom, please, can't we just talk about this reasonably? Withdraw the filing. I have been trying to talk to you for a year, Michael." I looked at him, feeling a crack in my heart. Every time I called, Jessica answered. Every time I visited, I was treated like a trespasser. And when I wanted to see you for Christmas, you told me to stay away. "That was a mistake," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. "It was a choice," I corrected him. "You chose to let her insult me. You chose to stop calling. Now, I am making a choice too." Jessica's expression shifted instantly. The hot rage cooled into something far more dangerous: calculation. She pulled out her phone, her thumbs hovering over the screen. "You want to play hardball, Helen? Fine." She held the phone up like a weapon. "I have 5,000 followers on Instagram. I am posting right now. I'm going to tell the world how Michael's wealthy, cruel mother is evicting him right before the holidays. How she's making her only son homeless." My stomach clenched. Public humiliation. "Go ahead," I said, though my knees felt like water. "Call the news stations too. Cruel mother evicts son is a great headline." I took a step closer to her. "But entitled couple destroys property with unpermitted construction and claims victimhood is also a great story. And unlike you, I have the inspection report to prove mine." Jessica's face flushed a deep, ugly red. You vindictive old witch. Get out of my house." "We'll sue you," she spat, backing toward the door. "For emotional distress, for every penny we put into that house." "With what money, Jessica?" I asked softly. "You quit your job, remember?" The silence that followed was damning. She grabbed Michael's arm and yanked him out the door. For the next 3 days, I didn't leave my property. I felt like a prisoner in my own victory. Jessica made good on her threat. My neighbor, Margaret, came over with a casserole and a worried expression. "She posted it, Helen," Margaret said gently, setting the dish on my counter. "She wrote that you're abusive, that you're punishing them for no reason. A lot of people are commenting, saying terrible things." I felt the room spin. I had built my life on dignity, on being a good neighbor, a good citizen. To be painted as a villain was a physical blow. "She turned him against me, Margaret," I whispered, tears finally pricking my eyes. "And they ruined the house, load-bearing walls gone, no permits." Margaret reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Helen, I've known you for 12 years. I saw you nurse your husband. I saw you raise Michael. I know who you are." She looked me dead in the eye. "You stand your ground. You hear me? Do not let that girl bully you." That simple validation was oxygen. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was just standing up. The next morning, the tactics changed. My doorbell rang. It was Jessica. Alone. She looked different. She was wearing old jeans and a loose sweater. No makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked small, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the dragon in designer heels who had stormed out 3 days ago. "I know you don't want to see me," she said, her voice trembling. "But please, 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, or perhaps out of morbid curiosity, I let her in. She sat on the edge of my sofa, hands folded in her lap like a penitent schoolgirl. "I've been awful to you," she began, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "I know that now. I think I was jealous. Michael loves you so much, and I felt like I had to compete. I handled it terribly." The apology was slick, polished. It hit every emotional beat perfectly. "I never meant for the Christmas text to happen," she continued. "I was stressed. And the renovations. We just wanted to make you proud. We messed up. Big time." She looked up, eyes swimming with tears. "Please, Helen, don't evict us. We'll fix it. We'll pay for the repairs. Just don't take our home." Our home. There it was again. "I'll do anything," she whispered. "I'll delete the posts. I'll publicly apologize. Just tell us what you want." I watched her, feeling a strange coldness in my chest. If this had happened a year ago, I would have hugged her. I would have forgiven everything. But I had seen the wolf behind the sheep's clothing. "Do you love my son, Jessica?" I asked. She blinked, startled by the question. "Of course I do." "Then why did you spend the last year isolating him?" I leaned forward. "Why did you intercept my calls? Why did you make him feel guilty for wanting to see his mother? Why did you try to erase me?" I didn't," she stammered. "You want me to drop the eviction? Fine, here is what I need. I need you to genuinely respect me. Not fear me, not manipulate me. Respect me." For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw it, a flash of pure irritation, a twitch of the jaw. She didn't want a relationship. She wanted a house. "I can do that," she said, but the words were flat. "No, you can't." I stood up. "Because you don't see me as a person, Jessica. You see me as an obstacle, and nothing I do will ever change that." I walked to the door and opened it. "The eviction stands. You have 23 days. The transformation was instantaneous. The tears vanished. The vulnerable posture straightened into rigid fury. She stood up, her face twisting into a sneer. "You are going to regret this, old woman," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Michael will never forgive you. You will die alone in this big, empty house, and no one will care. Get out." She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the silence, my heart pounding. She had come here to manipulate me, to play on my guilt, to use my love for my son as a weapon against me. And I had almost fallen for it. But almost wasn't enough. I walked to the phone and dialed Patricia Henderson. "She just tried to manipulate me into dropping it," I told her. "And?" Patricia asked. And I said no. "Good," Patricia said. "But Helen, listen to me. People who fight this hard, who switch from threats to tears and back to threats, They are usually hiding something. I think it's time we dug deeper. I want you to hire a private investigator. An investigator? It seemed like something out of a movie. Is that necessary? Trust me, Patricia said darkly. With a woman like Jessica, it is absolutely necessary. The private investigator, Sharon Rivera, was a woman who looked like she could read a tax return and a crime scene with equal indifference. She sat at my kitchen table 2 days later, her laptop humming a low, steady note. Patricia Henderson speaks highly of you, Sharon said, not looking up from her screen. She says you're evicting your son. That takes a spine. It takes desperation, I corrected, pouring her coffee. I need to know who I'm dealing with. Jessica. She changes. 1 minute she's sobbing, the next she's threatening to destroy me. It doesn't feel natural. Do you know her maiden name? Morrison. Jessica Morrison. Previous employment? I paused. I realized, with a jolt of shame, that I knew almost nothing concrete about the woman who had shared my son's bed for 6 years. She worked at a marketing firm when they met. I don't remember the name. She quit last month to start an online business, but I've never seen a product or a website. Sharon's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'll dig. Give me a week. But the enemy didn't wait a week. 4 days later, on a Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole, Michael and Jessica. But the energy was different. No shouting, no tears. They stood side by side, dressed in respectable casual wear, looking like a couple heading to a parent-teacher conference. Jessica held a thick folder against her chest like a shield. I opened the door. Mom, Michael started, his voice steady but strained. We want to apologize, properly. Can we come in? I stepped aside. They sat on the sofa, sitting close enough to touch, presenting a united front. Jessica placed the folder on the coffee table and smoothed her skirt. She offered me a smile that was warm, repentant, and terrifyingly genuine. We've been thinking about everything you said, Jessica began, her voice honey-sweet. And you're absolutely right, Helen. We should have gotten permits. We should have communicated. We were disrespectful. She slid the folder toward me. We've contacted 3 contractors. These are estimates for fixing everything. The load-bearing wall, the plumbing, the water damage. We are prepared to pay for all of it. I opened the folder. The numbers were staggering. Total estimated repair, $43,000. With what money? I asked, looking at Michael. Jessica is unemployed. Michael cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. I've been approved for a personal loan. The interest rate is manageable. It's all arranged. A loan? I stared at my son. You are going to go $40,000 into debt to fix damage you caused to my house? It's the right thing to do, he said, sounding like he was reciting a script. And Mom, we want to buy the house from you. Officially. My heart stopped. We'll get a mortgage, Jessica added quickly, leaning forward, her eyes bright. We'll pay you fair market value. We'll take the property off your hands so you don't have to worry about repairs or maintenance. You'll get a lump sum of cash perfect for your retirement, and we'll get to keep our home. It's a win-win. I looked at them. On the surface, it was a reasonable offer. A peace treaty. I get the money, they get the house, the war ends. But then I looked at Jessica's eyes. Behind the soft concern, there was a glint of hard, diamond-sharp triumph. She didn't want to make amends. She wanted the deed. She wanted to secure the asset before I could cut them out of the will. That is a very generous offer, I said slowly. But the eviction stands. Jessica's smile froze. It didn't disappear. It just stopped reaching her eyes. Helen, we are trying to make this right. We are offering you exactly what you want. I didn't ask for money, I said. I asked for respect, and I asked for my son back. We're here, aren't we? Michael pleaded. Mom, this is our olive branch. Please, just sell us the house and we can all move on. If I sell you the house, I said, standing up and walking to the window, what changes? Jessica will still isolate you. She will still treat me like an inconvenience. The only difference is that she will have won. That's not fair, Michael cried. Isn't it? I turned to Jessica. Be honest. If I sign those papers today, will you ever invite me over for Christmas again, or will I just be the bank you finally finished robbing? Jessica's face twitched. She opened her mouth to protest, to spin another lie, but the rage was bubbling up too fast. She stood up, the folder sliding off her lap. "You can't even say yes," I whispered. "Because you are asking me to pretend," Jessica exploded. The honey was gone, the vinegar poured out. "You want me to pretend I like you hovering over us? You want me to bow down and kiss your ring? You're just a bitter, lonely old woman who can't stand that her son chose someone else." "I don't mind that he chose you," I said calmly. "I mind that choosing you meant erasing me." "We're done here," she snapped, grabbing her purse. "Come on, Michael." Michael sat there for a second, looking between us. The torn look on his face broke my heart. "Michael," she barked, "now." He stood up, head hanging low. "We should go." They left. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. It was a trap. A beautiful, expensive trap. And I had just walked away from the easy way out. The next morning, Sharon Rivera called. "Helen, can you come to my office? Now?" "What did you find?" "Not over the phone." I drove to her office in a daze. Sharon met me at the door, her face grim. She led me to her desk and turned her monitor around. "Jessica Morrison is not who she claims to be," Sharon said. "What do you mean?" "The marketing job she told Michael about? She didn't quit. She was fired after 3 months for embezzlement." I gasped. "Embezzlement?" "Petty cash, mostly. Falsifying expense reports. Small amounts, but enough to get terminated. The company didn't prosecute because they wanted to avoid the scandal, but she's blacklisted in the industry." Sharon clicked a button. A new document appeared. After that, she worked for a real estate investment firm, fired again, this time for forging client signatures on documents. "Does Michael know?" "I doubt it. She's a professional liar, Helen. But here is the kicker." Sharon pulled up a credit report. Red numbers everywhere. She is drowning in debt. Credit cards, personal loans, even a predatory payday loan she took out 3 months ago. She owes over $60,000. "60,000?" I whispered. "And she just tried to get Michael to take out another $40,000 for repairs." "She needs cash flow," Sharon said. "But look at this." She pointed to a list of internet search history terms retrieved from a shared data breach. Tenants' rights state law, eviction process timeline, adverse possession requirements, how long to live in house to claim ownership. The room spun. "Adverse possession," I repeated. "Squatters' rights?" "She wasn't trying to isolate you because she didn't like you, Helen," Sharon said, her voice hard. "She was trying to establish a claim. She was researching how to legally steal your house by proving she had exclusive use of the property for a set period. That's why she barred you from visiting. That's why she changed the locks mentally, if not physically." The pieces clicked together like the tumblers of a safe. The isolation, the renovation without permits, to make the house theirs. The text message banning me from the property. It wasn't a family feud. It was a heist. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You document everything," Sharon said, handing me a thick dossier. "And you make sure that eviction goes through, because if they stay past the 30 days, she will dig in like a tick. She isn't fighting for a home, Helen. She is fighting for her only financial lifeline." I walked out of that office, clutching the dossier to my chest. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. That evening, I texted Michael. Just him. "Please come to dinner tonight. Alone. We need to talk. This is important." I prepared his favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, slow cooked until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. The smell filled the house, a scent from a simpler time when his biggest problem was a scraped knee, and I could fix everything with a kiss. Tonight, the problem was a $60,000 debt and a wife who was plotting a hostile takeover of his life. He arrived looking wary, his shoulders hunched. He checked his phone twice before stepping inside, likely reporting back to headquarters. "If this is about the eviction, Mom." "Sit down, Michael." I served the food in silence. The clinking of silverware on china sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He took a bite, chewed, and for a second, his face softened. The taste of home. Then, I placed the dossier on the table between us. It sat there, thick and ominous, next to the gravy boat. "I hired an investigator to look into Jessica's background," I said quietly. His fork clattered onto his plate. You did what? Read it. I'm not going to read your dirt file. Jesus, Mom, this is a new low. Investigating your own daughter-in-law? He pushed his chair back, ready to storm out. You had no right to act without permits, I said, my voice cutting through his anger like a razor. And I have a right to know who is destroying my property. Read it. Something in my tone, perhaps the absolute lack of hesitation, made him pause. He glared at me, then grabbed the folder. I watched his face as he turned the pages. I saw the moment he read the word embezzlement. I saw his brow furrow at the credit score. I saw his lips part in shock when he reached the debt total. This can't be right, he whispered, shaking his head. Jessica told me she left those jobs because of toxic management. She said they were abusive. She lied to you. No. But his voice lacked conviction. He turned another page. The internet search history, adverse possession, squatters' rights. She has been planning this, Michael, I said, leaning forward. The isolation, the renovations to make the house hers, the attempt to buy the house with a loan you can't afford. She is drowning in debt, and she saw an opportunity in my property, and in you. He stood up, pacing the kitchen, the file clutched in his hand like a lifeline he wished he could cut. You're wrong. You have to be wrong. Jessica loves me. She's my wife. I am sure she loves you, Michael. But she also loves what you can give her. Stability, a house, a way out of the hole she dug for herself. I softened my voice. Look at the dates, Michael. The payday loan was taken out 3 days before she demanded you stop talking to me. She needed control. I need to talk to her. He grabbed his coat. Michael, wait. But he was already gone. The front door slammed, leaving me alone with a cold pot roast and the terrifying possibility that I had just destroyed my son's world to save him. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. Calls from Michael, calls from Jessica. Then, a text from Michael. We need to talk, all 3 of us, tomorrow. I wrote back, my house, 10 a.m., and Michael, I want the truth this time. The next morning, they arrived separately. Michael looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were red-rimmed, his skin gray. Jessica arrived 2 minutes later. She looked like a cornered animal alert, dangerous, vibrating with adrenaline. We sat in the living room. I had made copies of Sharon's report. I placed them on the coffee table. Is it true? Michael asked Jessica. His voice was hollow. The embezzlement, the firings, the debt. Jessica's eyes flickered between the file and Michael's face. She didn't look at me. Those reports are biased, Michael. You know how corporate America is. They needed a scapegoat. I didn't do anything wrong. $60,000 in debt, Jessica, Michael said, his voice rising. Were you ever going to tell me? I was handling it. By quitting your job? He laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. By trying to get me to take out another loan to buy your mother-in-law's house? By researching how to steal the house if she wouldn't sell? That's not what I was doing. Her voice turned shrill. I was looking up our rights, because she pointed a shaking finger at me, was threatening us. I researched those terms before the eviction notice, Jessica, I said calmly. The timestamps are in the report. You were looking up adverse possession in October. The eviction was December. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Jessica looked at me with pure, distilled hatred. The mask was gone. There was no sweet daughter-in-law left, no victim, just a grifter who had been caught. You poisoned him, she spat. You couldn't stand that he chose me. You couldn't stand that he was happy. Answer the question, Michael said. He was looking at her, really looking at her, perhaps for the first time in years. What was the end game? Were you going to wait until Mom died? Or were you trying to push her out sooner? I did it for us, she screamed, tears finally flowing, but they looked angry, not sad. We needed a break. We needed a start. And she has so much money, Michael. She sits on this house like a dragon on gold. She doesn't need it. We deserved it. We deserved it. The entitlement hung in the air, ugly and naked. Michael stood up. He walked over to the window, looking out at the driveway where his car was parked next to hers. He took a deep breath. Get out. Jessica froze. What? Get out, Jessica. Get out of this house. Get out of our apartment. We're done. You can't be serious. She laughed nervously. Over this? Over some debt? I can fix it, Michael. We can fix it. Don't let her win. This isn't about her winning. Michael turned to face her, and his eyes were cold in a way I had never seen before. It's about you, lying, every day, for years. You made me hate my own mother to cover your tracks. You used me. I love you. No, he said softly. You don't. Jessica looked between us, realizing the game was over. Her face twisted. You'll regret this, she hissed at him. Then she turned to me. And you. I hope you rot in this house. She grabbed her purse and stormed out. The slam of the door was the final punctuation mark on a 5-year sentence. After she left, Michael didn't move. He stood by the window, trembling. Then, his legs seemed to give out. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. A sob ripped through him, a harsh, guttural sound of a man whose reality has just shattered. I'm so sorry, Mom, he wept. I'm so sorry. I sat beside him and pulled him into my arms, just like I did when he was a boy. He was heavy now, broad-shouldered, a grown man, but he shook like a leaf. I believed her, he choked out. About everything, the jobs, the debt, God, the way she talked about you. I let her convince me you were the villain. I sent that text. I told you not to come for Christmas. She was very skilled, Michael, I said, stroking his hair. It's not an excuse, but she knew exactly where to press. He looked up, his face wet with tears. You worked 2 jobs. You raised me alone. And I chose a thief over you. You are here now, I said. That is what matters. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said honestly. But you have it anyway. We sat there for a long time as the winter sun moved across the floorboards. The house was quiet, but for the first time in months, it wasn't empty. What happens now? He asked, wiping his eyes. Now, I said, you move out of that house. The eviction stands. He nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. I know. I'll start looking for apartments today. I can't stay there. It feels tainted. And Jessica? I'll file for divorce, he said, his voice hardening. I can't be with someone who would do this. She'll fight, I'm sure. Let her fight, I said, feeling the steel in my spine again. We have the truth, and this time, you're on the right side of it. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael moved his belongings out of the house. He worked quietly, head down, packing his life into cardboard boxes. Jessica, however, dug in. She refused to leave, claiming tenant rights, claiming she had nowhere to go, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy. But Patricia Henderson was ready. We had the documentation, the unpermitted renovations, the structural damage, the valid 30-day notice, the court filing. When the sheriff finally arrived to enforce the eviction, Jessica didn't go quietly. I watched from my car parked down the street too far to intervene, close enough to witness the end. She stood in the doorway, screaming at the officers. This is my house. I've lived here for 5 years. You can't just throw me out. Ma'am, this property is owned by Helen Chen. You were given proper notice. You need to vacate immediately. She was escorted out, still shouting, calling me names that would have once shattered me. She called me a monster. She called me a vindictive witch who couldn't stand to see her son happy. But as I watched her drive away, her car loaded with hastily packed bags, I didn't feel like a monster. I felt like a surgeon who had finally cut out a tumor. I entered the house afterward. The silence was absolute. I walked through the rooms, surveying the wreckage, the missing walls, the water stains blooming on the ceiling like bruises, the gouges in the hardwood where furniture had been dragged out. It would cost $43,000 to repair, money I didn't have. I stood in the center of the living room, the open concept space they had created by destroying the bones of my home. I realized then that I couldn't fix it, and I didn't want to. This house, once a symbol of my success, was now a monument to betrayal. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Jessica's attorney. She was suing me for unjust enrichment, claiming she had improved the property value and deserved compensation for her renovations. I showed it to Patricia. She laughed, a dry, sharp sound. She destroyed your property with unpermitted construction, and now wants you to pay her for it? This will be dismissed so fast her head will spin." And it was. The judge took one look at the building code violations and threw out the lawsuit. He also ordered Jessica to pay my legal fees. She declared bankruptcy 3 months later. I heard through Michael that she had moved back to her parents' house in another state. Her online business never materialized. Without Michael's income to bleed, she couldn't sustain the illusion of success. I sold the house as is to a developer. I didn't make the fortune I would have if it were pristine, but I made enough. Enough to clear the mortgage, enough to secure my retirement, and most importantly, enough to buy my freedom. As Michael helped me load the last box from the house into my trunk, he paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I never thanked you," he said quietly. "For what? Evicting you?" "No, for not giving up on me, for fighting for yourself, even when it meant fighting against me." He looked at the house one last time, then back at me. "You could have just accepted it. A lot of mothers would have just let themselves be pushed aside to keep the peace." "I am not a lot of mothers," I said. He smiled. A real smile, the first one I had seen in over a year. "No, you're not." A year passed, then another. The money from the house sale bought me more than security. It bought me a ticket to Japan. I spent 3 weeks there, a solo traveler at 64. I soaked in hot springs in Hakone, watching the steam rise into the cold mountain air. I ate sushi in Tokyo that made me close my eyes in bliss. I visited temples in Kyoto and prayed not for things, but for continued strength. I sent Michael postcards from every stop. When I returned, I didn't go back to waiting by the phone. I joined Margaret's book club. I found myself surrounded by women like me, survivors of divorce, illness, and life's sharp edges. Women who refused to be invisible. Michael came to dinner every Sunday. It became our ritual. He would arrive at 5 p.m., usually with a bottle of wine or a news story from work. We cooked together. We talked about his therapy sessions. Yes, he was seeing a counselor to unpack the Jessica years, to understand why he had been so susceptible to manipulation. "I was so desperate to be a good husband," he told me once, chopping onions. "I thought supporting my wife meant agreeing with her, even when she was cruel. I lost myself." "You found your way back," I said. "That is the hard part." He started dating again, cautiously. 6 months ago, he introduced me to Karen. She was a librarian with a dry wit and a firm handshake. When she disagreed with Michael about a movie over dinner, she said so clearly, respectfully, and without malice. Michael didn't shrink. He laughed. "Your mom is amazing," I heard Karen tell him later. "Traveling alone to Japan? That takes guts." "She's the strongest person I know," Michael replied. The pride in his voice healed the last of my wounds. I invested the rest of the house money in my garden. I built a small greenhouse and started growing orchids, temperamental, difficult flowers that required patience and resilience, just like me. I sold them at the local farmer's market. People started calling me the orchid lady. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. 2 years after the eviction, my phone buzzed with a notification, a direct message on social media from a blocked account. It was Jessica. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed my life. You took everything from me, all because you couldn't stand to see your son happy. I hope it was worth it." I stared at the screen. I thought about the fear I used to feel when her name popped up. I thought about the sleepless nights, the trembling hands, the feeling of being small. I didn't feel any of that now. I felt nothing. Indifference. Jessica never understood. I hadn't destroyed her life. She had dismantled it herself with lies and greed. I had simply refused to be the collateral damage. I didn't reply. I blocked the new account and put the phone down. "Hey, Mom." I looked up. Michael was walking through the garden gate, holding a large cake box. Karen was behind him, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. Margaret and the book club ladies were already setting up chairs on the patio. It was my 67th birthday. We ate cake under the pergola I had built. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over my orchids. Michael stood up to make a toast. "To my mom?" he said, raising his glass. "Who taught me that love doesn't mean losing yourself? That setting boundaries isn't cruel, and that protecting your dignity is the greatest act of courage. Everyone raised their glasses. To Helen! I looked around at the faces of people who loved me. Not because I was useful, not because I was a bank, but because I was me. This is what victory looks like. Not revenge, not schadenfreude at an enemy's downfall, but peace, wholeness, a life lived on my own terms. I had survived poverty, I had survived cancer, and I had survived the heartbreak of my own child turning against me. I hadn't just survived, I had bloomed. So, here is what I learned. Standing up for yourself isn't selfishness. It is survival. Love does not require you to accept mistreatment. You teach people how to treat you. And if they refuse to learn, you show them the door. Even if you have to change the locks,